treating the legal side of your business as a set and forget can sometimes cause you problems. So, for example, people will create a company and then not update the company details on ASIC. They may do all sorts of things and then not realize that you need to keep things up to date. And so keep your company returns going. If you've got a trademark registered, make sure your details are up to date with the Intellectual Property Office of Australia. Otherwise, you won't get reminders for renewals. And one thing that people sometimes don't realize, especially with a company, is that if you allow the company to become deregistered, all of the assets of the company are forfeited to the state. Yep, it all belongs to the government. How lovely is that? It's a little bit of a trap for people who own companies or own shares in the company. So what often happens with a small business is you've got a person, they're the sole shareholder and the sole director, and they start to think of the business as theirs, the money is theirs, the property is theirs, but it actually belongs to the company. And once the company no longer exists, it's like a person dies, then what happens to the assets? Obviously, if you've made a provision for the assets to be transferred out of the company before it's deregistered, then that's fine. So that's kind of like having a will, if you carry on with that analogy of the person dying. But what happens if you die without a will? The law says the money goes to certain people. Well, in the case of a company, if it is deregistered, then its assets go to the state. Now, I've had a few people who this has happened to, who they remember to transfer things out like money, out of the bank account, things like that. But then they forget about their trademark, because a trademark is valid for 10 years. You only have to renew it every 10 years. And so I've had a couple of clients actually end up losing their trademark because the company that owns it no longer exists. So something to think about. Legal stuff is not just set and forget. So, which means basically the take home is that it is important to get regular reviews. So you're doing this course, you're going to get the risk assessment and the action plan at the end, but I actually recommend that you go through that checklist frequently. And so once every 2 or 3 years to see what might have changed. The other thing that might have changed could be laws surrounding your industry. And so the tanning industry, for example, you could have tanning beds at one stage and then they were banned. So people went from being able to have tanning beds to not being able to have tanning beds. And if you're not keeping alert for those kind of things, then it's something that could catch you out. Another type of law change could be, well, this happened, a zoning change. This affected one of my neighbours actually. We live on a small holding, it's sort of semi-rural, and he had a sawmill, for cutting trees and cutting planks in trees. He used to build log cabins, wooden cabins. So he had a sawmill, and this machinery never caused us any problems, but a new neighbour moved in and they didn't like him and they complained to the council. And my neighbour, who had run this sawmill and hut building business, had done it for 20 years. And he just laughed off this new neighbour and went, what are you talking about? We're in a rural area. We're allowed to do this. Actually, it turns out that a couple of years before, the regulations in that area, the zoning had changed. And because now we were zoned as semi-rural, he was no longer allowed to run his business in that way. Or on that site. And so he faced, poor guy, a massive fine because he had been illegally operating his business, even though it was legal for about 18 years. Then the zoning changed and he didn't know, and it suddenly became illegal, and he'd still been operating it. And then there was the complaint. So not only did he have to face massive fines, He also had to close down his business that he had had for nearly 2 decades. He actually ended up relocating it somewhere else, but it wasn't very successful at all. So when it comes to legal things in your business, if you've obtained advice right at the beginning when you started, that's great. Well done. Good job. But it is important to be aware that things change all the time. Not only do laws change, but sometimes the law stays the same, but the way that judges interpret it are completely different. And this causes annoyance amongst everybody, but sometimes that just happens. One day a certain thing amounts to defamation, the next day a judge says, no, that's not defamation. So it's important to keep on top of that. And my recommendation on one of the ways to do that is to have your business reviewed regularly to make sure you're complying with legal requirements. And another way is to sign up to a newsletter or legal alerts from your favorite lawyer. And of course, you can sign up to my legal alerts, which go out just a little snippet of advice, different things that are happening, different pieces of information. Sometimes the law might not even have changed, but you might have forgotten. I had a client the other day who, she came to me 2 years ago to secure her trademark, decided the timing wasn't right, and then carried on. And then I saw her post something on Facebook. Great announcement. I've got this new program going. And I messaged her. I said to Paula, what are you doing? We haven't done the trademark yet. And she said, oh, I totally forgot. I knew I spoke to you and I knew I had to get it done, but I totally forgot. And so it's useful just to be aware of legal requirements in your business, legal changes, and once you start becoming aware of it, it's not that difficult to keep up to date with what's happening in the legal field in respect of your small business. All the best with it. The most important thing to remember, though, is that once you've got the legalities right, it is not a case of set and forget. There will still be, you'll need maintenance. It's like when you've had your car serviced or you bought a brand new car. Everything's good, or maybe not so good these days, but then sometimes it needs a bit of a tune-up. So don't forget to give your business a legal tune-up from every now and then.